Today's talk is, I would like to say, is optimistic. There are last two talks that if you attended, the first one we did was on California water and the drought, and it was as alarming as the drought is. And then we had, our last talk was on sort of the latest trends and understandings of what the climate crisis is doing, what's driving it. So that was also somewhat of a very sobering conversation. We talked about the latest IPCC report as we head into the COP26 in Glasgow beginning first week of November. So this talk today was really answering the question. We now know the causes of what we call the climate crisis. We know its impacts, at least in the Western states, we know its impacts when it comes to drought and water. And then the real question is, well, what are we going to do about it? Now, it is conventional wisdom, and I know when I was an undergraduate at UCSB studying environmental studies, that cities were perceived to really be the opposite of what would constitute a greener, more environmentally sustainable life. And in fact, there was a real turning away from the urban cores as unpleasant places, with all kinds of multiplied negatives: not enough open space, not enough green space, bad air, traffic jams, conflict between people. And over a period of about 20 years in our American culture, we did a lot to, in a sense, make cities a less than attractive place. And I think that we've learned a lot since then, because I submit to you today that as the human population urbanizes, which is already a demographic fact, the hope for sustainability actually lies in cities. I know that sounds oxymoronic, it even sounds contradictory, but you'll see today why that is. I want to introduce both Dr. Rueben Smith, Vice Chancellor of Facilities at LACCD, and Bharat Patel, who works with BuildLACCD at the building level. So what we're going to do today is we're going to go from the global to the local. We're going to go from what are the trends happening on a global scale, on a more national scale, and even on a California, Los Angeles scale, and then we'll really be local with the two presentations from facilities. The first question we were asking was more complicated. I've simplified it a bit. I've actually asking one question: energy efficiency in the built environment, is sustainability possible? Now, it's interesting how the word sustainability has sort of been so overused that it does, in a sense, beg the question, what are we sustaining for who? So that it's really one of those murky sort of United Nations terms that appeals to everyone because it offends no one. But as we've seen the trends in the climate crisis and what is happening, for example, to coastlines and sea level rise and so on, the term that now gets used a whole lot is resilience. And I have colleagues who are saying, resilience, well, isn't that throwing in the towel? Are we now saying, let's just prepare for the worst because we can't do the best? Now, I don't think that's the case, because in California, we do think about resilience, for example, when we design our buildings to withstand earthquakes. So the building codes in California that are imposed on schools and hospitals and universities are in fact to make those buildings more resilient in the case of earthquakes. So resilience can include things like what the California Coastal Commission is calling the retreat, the managed retreat from the coast, which seems to ruffle a lot of feathers, but it's the realistic acceptance that there's going to be change for a long time, even if we stop producing greenhouse gases tomorrow morning. If we could bring to a halt all greenhouse gas emissions tomorrow, which we can't, but let's say we could, we would still have to deal with all of the carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide that are already in the atmosphere. And we've discussed that in a previous talk, so I don't want to dwell on it too much, except to say that that is really, the challenge is twofold. One is to stop adding greenhouse gases to the atmosphere, and the other one is to take the carbon dioxide that's in the atmosphere out. And that is a whole different issue when it comes to cities, because the two most important building materials we have in our urban environment is steel and cement. And both of those materials have a very significant carbon footprint. So here's some of the questions that I wanted to pose to you today. And I want to then make the provocative statements that cities are, in fact, the future of the species. Now, what's happening here is that the trends that we're seeing with different scenarios, starting with 2020, 2021, and these 5 different scenarios paint the trend of failure to bring the temperatures lower than, as you can see on the y-axis, 2.5 degrees Celsius. We know that 1.5 degrees Celsius is something that is an achievable goal, that we could avert many of the possible long-term consequences of climate change. 2 degrees Celsius was the original idea, and what we're seeing then is that that would actually, in a sense, throw in the towel on a lot of coastal populations. Keep in mind that a great majority of the human species lives within 100 miles of a coastline. So what do we need to do in order to reverse that? There's several key terms that are used a lot. One is decarbonization, which means to produce energy without carbon dioxide. Dematerialization, which is something that even architects and engineers deal with as they try to use materials that are perhaps lighter in weight and more sustainable in terms of their entire, you could say, their entire commodity chain. That is, we need to think of sustainability and resilience, not just in terms of a snapshot of a moment in time, but in terms of the entire process from raw materials to, well, as it used to be called, cradle to grave, and as it should be called, cradle to cradle. How can we create a zero waste economy? How can we do that with very low levels of carbon to energy? So there is the problem of embodied carbon, which is what buildings represent. There is the elusive goal of what do we call net zero? What does that mean? On a global scale, net zero has been harshly criticized as meaning very little. But when you talk to an architect or an engineer and say, well, what is a net zero building? Just the building itself, that's a different discussion. And in fact, net zero buildings are in fact quite attainable, even at the smallest level of a house, say the passive house system that they use in Germany, and at the largest level with LEED standards and other standards that Dr. Smith will probably talk about. I also want to visit the concepts of carbon capture or negative carbon in the sense of, can we change the way we make steel and cement, and visit two visions, Plan LA and LA 100. I do think that cities have virtues, and among the virtues are that cities represent agglomerations or economies of scale that you cannot otherwise obtain. They do represent a concentration of wealth and power, which could be seen as not a virtue, or in fact as an ability of people to participate in government and in policymaking to a much greater extent than they do if they're scattered throughout a large geographical or rural area. Cities bring in the United States a high degree of ethnic diversity. Immigrant communities thrive in cities like Los Angeles, where we have as many as 43 languages. And it's something that Angelenos and people in American cities are more embracing of than they might have been, say, 50 years ago. Cities also provide an efficiency in resource use, water, transportation, and energy, particularly where new technologies and new building materials can transform these systems into something that is less carbon producing. So there are efficiencies in the uses of buildings and materials required for work. And then cities have what we love the most, the cultural amenities, the arts, the innovation, the social cohesion and cooperation, which 40 years ago, an environmentalist would have said, no, cities don't have social cohesion and cooperation. But you can see that in fact, at least in our city, there's in cities in general in the United States, you do tend to have, I'm thinking of New York City after 9/11, which brought a high degree of social cohesion when New Yorkers faced that particular crisis. But here is the trend, irreversible. The human population has become urban. This has happened within our lifetimes. It's happened in the last few years, a major turning point in human history. So most people now live in agglomerations of 1 million or more. What we call urban does vary. You could say a concentration of 10,000 people constitutes an urban population. For this particular data, what they're using is 1 million. So there are cities that are 1 to 3 million that are perhaps more potentially sustainable than large mega cities. So the challenge for Los Angeles is we're not Barcelona. We don't have 3 million people. In the larger conurbation of Los Angeles, which includes neighboring counties of Ventura, Riverside, San Bernardino, and Orange, we have 13 million people and maybe more than that as our population increases. That said, it is interesting to see to what degree Los Angeles has kept its resource use well, when it comes, for example, to water, kept its resource use at the same level that it was in the 1990s, despite a huge growth in the population. And so you can see then this is the shift. Rural populations are leveling off, and urban populations by the year 2010 now exceed 4.5 billion people. And most of it is going on in both actually developed and developing countries. But the urbanization of the third world, if we want to call it that, is a double-edged sword, because so many developing countries do not, in fact, have the economic size to actually build the kind of city that will accommodate their migrants. And the real trend in many regions of the world, historically in South America or Latin America, contemporarily, we could say in Africa, is a movement of rural people to urban areas. And in many cases, those cities are not easily able to absorb those new populations. But do more people live in rural or urban areas? You can see in this map, we've really become a majority urban species. And now, unfortunately, when you look in the case of the African continent, that's where rural to urban migration has been some of the most fastest. Cities like Nairobi in Kenya, Lagos, Nigeria, that have Lagos has upwards of 10 million people, or maybe more than that. So that's why they use this term slums. That is that their cities are not ready to build the kind of housing necessary to absorb those migrants. But over the past 50 years, and you can see the real turning point has happened, where major countries in the world have become very urbanized. In the case of Japan, 90% urbanized society. So can cities be sustainable? I think so. I think that is in fact the challenge of our time, and it's the promise actually for surviving as a species on the planet. Now, there is a lot of resistance, particularly in Southern California, where people have a sort of suburban culture of space, so that they highly value the detached house, the kidney-shaped pool, the grapefruit tree, and they tend to eschew or dislike the idea of density corridors, mixed-use buildings, high rises, and so on. But that's changing. As people appreciate urban life more, you see this reversal of, instead of flocking away from the urban core, now people are flocking to the urban core, with the unfortunate dimension that a lot of that is what we call gentrification. But cities are the key to the future. This is a series that Flipboard has that actually features articles on higher density on cities. So let me now turn to this.
Back to Los Angeles. The Los Angeles region has the third largest economy of any region in the world, after Tokyo and New York. It's the second largest city in the US and is known by many as the City of Angels, La La Land, Tinseltown, and according to Wikipedia, Double Dubuque? Okay. Los Angeles doesn't really have a long history of being sustainable. The city grew in its early days thanks to the oil industry in the region. To provide water for the growing city, Los Angeles stole water from the Owens Valley. And Los Angeles embraced cars, freeways, and the resulting urban sprawl. For decades, those cars, combined with unfavorable geography and climate, led to hazy, smog-filled skies. To be fair to Los Angeles, many cities have struggled with some or all of these environmental concerns, but LA was really good at being bad for the environment. How can a city like Los Angeles become more sustainable? Well, what does sustainable mean exactly? It has been used so much to mean so many things that it's easy to think of it as an empty buzzword. But a generally accepted definition for sustainable development, the kind of sustainability that relates to cities, is development that meets the needs of the current generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. Basically, if one generation pollutes all the water so the future generations can't drink it anymore, that's not sustainable. This is why sustainability is important to cities like Los Angeles. Los Angeles is expected to add 500,000 residents in the next 17 years. So not only must the air, water, and electricity be enough for LA's current population, but also its future population, which will be even larger. Los Angeles, like many cities throughout the world, believe they need a plan of action to grow sustainably. So the Los Angeles Mayor's Office set upon the task of developing that plan. They contacted nearly 90 stakeholder groups in the city, as well as all departments of the city government, to get input about what should be included in the plan. They conducted an audit to determine what LA was already doing well on the sustainability front. They worked diligently to take that input and transform it into coherent goals and objectives with a known current condition and measurable outcomes. The mayor's office called this plan the Sustainable City Plan and released it in 2015. The plan is divided into 3 thematic sections: the environment, equity, and economics. These aren't random categories, but a very common way for cities to approach sustainability. The framework is called the 3 E's of sustainability. Sustainable cities must balance all 3 E's while still achieving the definition of sustainable development. The 3 E's ensures that cities consider the needs of citizens from all racial and income groups when implementing policies. And it also ensures that the environmental policies don't wreak havoc on the local economy or bankrupt the city. Within each thematic section are goals and targets. I've seen a lot of plans in my day, and the goals and targets in this plan are incredibly visual and readable. The targets are also really measurable. For example, in the water section of this plan, they state that by 2017, they want to reduce per capita water use by 20%. By 2025, they will reduce imported water purchases by 50%. And by 2035, the city will source 50% of its water locally. These are clear, measurable objectives. And for the record, they did achieve that 2017 goal. They've achieved 55 of the 61 2017 outcomes, and even completed 2 of the 2025 objectives ahead of schedule. How do I know? Because they built an online data dashboard, updated quarterly, that allows anyone to check on the progress of the plan. With the 2017 deadline in the rearview mirror, the city is looking ahead to the 2025 deadline and already making some progress. As someone particularly interested in land use and transportation, these goals really stand out. Currently, 42% of building permits are issued in transit-oriented areas, but they're aiming for that number to be 57% by 2025. The non-car mode share numbers are 26% currently, but they want to get that number to 35% by 2025. Plans like this are only as good as the data they get to set and track objectives, and this plan has a lot of great data. I wonder where all this data came from. A lot of the data is collected already by city departments and cooperating stakeholders and repurposed for the sustainability plan. The city is continuing to look for new sources of data to set and track these objectives. One tool they're using is the Siemens City Performance Tool. It's a model that takes data on electricity, transportation, and building performance and gives the LA Mayor's Office a sense of what sustainability outcomes are ambitious yet achievable, exactly the kind of thing the plan needs. If the city of Los Angeles can achieve all of the 2035 goals in its plan, it will have officially shaken off its less than stellar track record on environmental issues. It will have reduced energy use in buildings by 30%, see only 5% of its waste reach landfills, reduce its urban heat island effect by 3 degrees, and ensure all residents will live within a half mile of fresh food. And this is all while LA's population is increasing substantially. These are ambitious but achievable goals. And if Los Angeles can do it, so can cities around the world.
So that's optimistic, and that was something that came out of the mayor's office as well as Siemens, which is a major international everything, logistics, technology, railroad locomotives, you name it, Siemens does it. So this was a vote that happened recently. The city council voted for 100% renewable for LADWP by 2035, and that actually has accelerated by a decade. That's something we've also seen in our own district with Dr. Rueben Smith, moving up the deadlines, the goals that we had for, say, 2040 have now been moved up to the year 2030. So like the city of Los Angeles, the LA Community College District is accelerating the pace by which we reach some of the goals that had been perhaps off in the distance in the past. This just shows you the urbanization of the United States, with all of the green counties having experienced an increase in their populations, and then all of the sort of orange ones a decrease. But Los Angeles is a modern post-war city, unlike, say, St. Louis, Missouri, which is a river city on the Mississippi. We are more like Fort Worth, Texas. That is, some people say there is no city in Los Angeles. It's a bunch of suburbs knitted together by freeways. But what we've learned in many ways in the last 20, 30 years is that Los Angeles is indeed a very vibrant, and while not a centralized city, does offer any of the urban amenities you would find in other major cities. This just shows you the huge growth of a city like Las Vegas, Nevada, which is unsustainable. There's not enough water for Las Vegas to actually support this degree of sprawl. And it is sprawl that multiplies the urban problems over larger and larger stretches of land. So suburbia is perhaps the more serious negation of environmental sustainability than the city itself. So our love of the suburbs involves the transforming of land that is formerly agricultural or even wildland into this sort of cookie cutter low cost constructions that are often very far away, very hard to serve with transit systems and the like. The heat dome of the city itself is something that in Los Angeles is actually being addressed with everything from literally painting streets a lighter color so that the sunlight would bounce off of them. And
from the people to the power grid, LA is a city like no other. And its leadership has set a bold goal to power LA with 100% renewable energy by 2045. That's why the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, the nation's largest municipal utility, partnered with NREL, the nation's leading renewable energy research lab, on LA 100. It's the most comprehensive, detailed study to model an entirely renewable-based grid as complex as LA's. And it's only possible with the uniquely integrated capabilities of a national lab. Energy analysts are running millions of simulations to inform objective answers to the big questions on the road to 100%. How might demand for electricity change as more Angelenos adopt energy technologies like electric vehicles and rooftop solar? And what could LA's future grid look like? Does reaching 100% mean big changes locally, like building new transmission lines or power plants? How can LA make sure that new system is reliable under extreme events like fires and heat waves? What about impacts on jobs, air quality, health, the local economy, and environmental justice? And what might all of this cost? Along the way, LADWP's engineers are learning how to use NREL's high-tech tools and data sets for their own analyses to convert the findings into workable, achievable plans best suited for LA. But LA 100 isn't just about running models and crunching numbers. Every step of the way, the research has been guided by real people who live and work in LA, making sure the study represents those who know LA best, from neighborhood and business representatives to policy and clean energy experts. The result? Objective insights driven by data and tailored to LA's unique and diverse communities. So the city can be sure a 100% renewable future will benefit 100% of LA. And so that other cities can follow LA's lead and apply what we've learned in tackling their own energy goals. Stay tuned for results in 2021 and learn more about LA 100 on nrel.gov.
so that was a very optimistic view provided by LAWP, but you can see that there is quite a bit of data crunching and research going into these goals. Some cities like Ithaca, New York, have actually spent a lot on retrofitting existing buildings, and that is where this whole issue of embodied carbon needs to be confronted. Lloyd Alter, who edits Tree Hugger, is quite outspoken on his criticisms of net zero ideas and even of some very popular sort of trendy ideas within the discourse of environmentalism. This is his questioning of net zero. But net zero gets questioned because it involves, for example, in the cap and trade system, the ability of a greenhouse gas producer to offset their carbon dioxide emissions by either purchasing forest land in the Amazon or in some way finding a carbon sink that would offset their carbon emissions. So the critics say this is basically an excuse to go on with business as usual by claiming that we will have in the future technologies that are not here today to address that exact problem. How do we take the carbon dioxide that's in the atmosphere out? These are just different examples of why automobile driving is almost contraindicated in a large metropolitan area, both in terms of its costs and in terms of its overall impacts. Cities like Portland, Oregon, a long time ago, instituted the idea of green belts. Though challenged many times in the courts, Portland has succeeded in preventing suburban sprawl and conserving a lot of its nearby rural areas for what they are. In that case, you can see that it's even, Willamette Valley wineries. So Portland did sort of set a standard for new urbanism and concepts in sustainable city urban planning that have been copied in cities like Sacramento. This is Portland's concentration on bicycles. This is New York, an abandoned elevated subway where people in the community demanded it be turned into a park. It's a very interesting, long park, and it's used a lot by New Yorkers. So cities do, in fact, with their denser populations, have smaller carbon footprints than sprawling suburbs. And you can see there for the Bay Area, the green colors are smaller carbon footprint, and the larger ones are in those exurbs and outer suburbs of the Bay Area. So cement, how do we deal with cement?
The basic ingredient of concrete is cement, which gets churned up with water, sand, and aggregates to make the stuff we all see around us in our modern day infrastructure. The current method of making cement, or Portland cement to give it its full name, is to grind up limestone, which is calcium carbonate, with materials like clay, slate, silica sand, and iron ore, and chuck it all in a massive rotating kiln at something like 1500 degrees Celsius. The kiln is tilted at an angle, and as the mixture goes from the higher end to the lower end, various elements are driven out to form a new substance at the bottom end called clinker, which comes out of the kiln as little grey balls about the size of marbles. A small amount of gypsum and limestone gets added in with the marbles, and then they all get ground up to a powder so fine that it can actually pass through a sieve capable of holding water. And that powder is Portland cement, and it's literally become the foundation of our modern society. The trouble is, here's what the chemical reaction inside the kiln looks like. That might not mean a great deal to you, but check out the far right-hand side of the equation, and you can see that one of the major products is carbon dioxide. In fact, for every metric ton of cement produced, 1 metric ton of CO2 goes up into the atmosphere. And the world uses 4 billion tons of concrete every year. And then there's the fossil fuels like powdered coal that you have to burn at ferocious temperatures to get the kiln hot enough to melt limestone, which of course results in even more CO2 emissions. All of that means that the cement industry alone accounts for 8% of total greenhouse gas emissions. That's more than twice as impactful as the global aviation industry. All industrialized countries use cement, of course, as is so perfectly illustrated by this world map that you can find at the website ourworldindata.org. So no country is blameless, but looking at their data chart, there is one very clear winner, and it's our friends over in China. So cement is a problem, and it's a problem that's been well understood for decades. Geopolymer cement was developed by a French material scientist called Joseph Davidovits, using rocks that eliminate the need to break down calcium carbonate, and with a chemical reaction that takes place at only half the temperature, resulting in a claimed 80% reduction in CO2 emissions. But even after several decades of development, green cement still only accounts for just over 3% of all concrete usage around the world. And that's really because there just hasn't been any economic or regulatory incentive for cement producers to invest in expensive new machinery when their current equipment still works, or for construction companies to pay a premium for a more environmentally friendly building material.
So David Borlas has a series on YouTube called Just Have a Think. This was a small segment of his discussion on cement. He goes on to discuss what are possibly 5 different companies' approach to lower carbon footprint cement, concrete. I highly recommend it, and he has a whole series on YouTube. This is actually the other problem, steel. So I want to believe that it's possible that we could change the way that we manufacture iron and steel to reduce the fact that it also has a very significant carbon footprint. So here's Dave again explaining an alternative way that is low in carbon to make steel.
Steel is actually one of the most recycled materials in the world today. About 30% of new steel is recycled from scrap, and making new steel from scrap only takes about 1/8 of the energy compared to making it from iron ore. But steel production volumes are much higher today than when the products that are currently being recycled were produced. So that still leaves 70% of new steel being made from iron ore. The IEA Sustainable Development Scenario states that the average direct CO2 emission intensity of steel production needs to decline by 60% by 2050. We could just try to bottle the CO2 using the theoretically hopeful concept of carbon capture, utilization and storage, or CCUS, And sure enough, the IEA does include this technology in its scenario projection. But in order for CCUS to play a meaningful role, the IEA calculated it would need to be preventing 400 million tons of CO2 escaping each year by 2050. And to achieve that, a 1 million ton per annum CCUS facility would have to come online every 2 to 3 weeks from 2030 onwards. Water is split into hydrogen and oxygen in an electrolyzer powered by renewables. The hydrogen replaces the coke that would normally be added to the iron oxide to reduce it. The hydrogen reacts with iron oxide at the relatively low temperature of about 800 degrees Celsius to make what the industry calls sponge iron. The byproduct of hydrogen direct reduction is no longer carbon dioxide, but simply water, which can be recycled back into the hydrogen electrolyzer. The sponge iron now doesn't need to go through a blast furnace. It can be charged straight into an electric arc furnace along with recycled scrap iron. You do still need to add some carbon to make the iron into steel, though. There's no getting away from that law of physics. And there will still be some impurities to remove too. So lime and carbon sources are both added to the electric arc furnace as well. But because the iron ore reduction work has been done by hydrogen instead of coke, the researchers found that this method emits only 2.8% of the carbon dioxide currently churned out by existing coke and blast furnace systems. They also calculated that HDI uses 3.4 megawatt hours of electricity for every ton of steel produced. And they say that would make it cost competitive against an existing integrated steel plant only if there was an internationally mandated carbon price of between 34 and 68 euros per ton of CO2, and assuming electricity cost of 40 euros per megawatt hour. Those are big assumptions, but it's quite likely that every major carbon dioxide emitter on the planet is going to have to get used to the reality of carbon pricing in the near future. And one of the big bonuses of the hydrogen reduction system is flexibility in production and electricity demand, which could allow for grid balancing through storage of hydrogen. The Swedish Energy Agency has calculated that this process could reduce the CO2 emissions of their entire country by up to 10%. As steel markets in the big consuming economies like China and India start to mature, the availability of scrap material for recycling will increase, of course, and that's a good thing. But nevertheless, the IEA still warns that new technologies will need to be deployed at a blistering pace, with new infrastructure to go alongside them. In the case of hydrogen direct reduction, they reckon it'll need to account for at least 15% of all primary steel production by 2050. And that equates to one new plant every month for at least 2 decades, starting in 2030. A sustainable transition for the iron and steel sector won't happen on its own, though. As with so many of the new technologies we've looked at on this channel, governments will need to play a key role. Although 2050 is often used as the target date, the IEA argues that governments and decision makers should have 2030 firmly in mind as the critical window to accelerate the transition. Heavy subsidies will most likely be needed to help pay for the capital expenditure to get these industrial scale processes up and running. And of course, a global carbon pricing structure will be absolutely essential. That'll no doubt be the topic of great discussion at the pivotal COP26 climate conference in November 2021.
So I have to agree with him. We can't expect our normal market mechanisms to take us where we need to go. Markets have failed us on the issue of climate, and that is why the current administration in the White House is so keen to spend upwards of $3 trillion in an infrastructure program that has major climate components to it. The buildings that you see here and the solar panels are the look of a more sustainable future when it comes to design and build. So with that, I now would like to turn over the discussion to Dr. Rueben Smith, Vice Chancellor of Facilities for LACCD, and Bharat Patel at BuildLACCD, who will give us a much more local ground level view of what we can hope to do in Los Angeles in our immediate future. And that's when we're talking about years like 2030 and not 2045 or not 2050.
Geez, okay. Right, thanks very much. That was a very interesting presentation, George. Excellent, absolutely excellent. And if you note, as George Leddy was saying, the cities are increasing in the amount of population, but the location of those cities, have you noticed, they're all by the coast, and that was historical simply because of the shipping lanes and the trading. So, you know, you took New York, Paris, London, Any city you want, the major cities are around the coast. And just out of interest, the most sustainable transport would be a boat, simply because the displacement, Archimedes' principle, you displace them around the weight of the actual commodity by the weight of the water, so it doesn't need much to pull the boat across. So if anyone asks you about transportation, that is a very good way of transporting. Anyway, so what this discussion is going to be about is it's going to be, we're going to focus on zero net energy. The state of California defines zero net energy for buildings as energy efficient buildings that produces as much clean renewable energy as it consumes over the course of the year when accounted for at the energy generation source. We just talked about the COP in Glasgow. We know the IPCC have issued code red as we are in imminent danger of reaching and hitting the 1.5 degrees centigrade by 2040. So we're in desperate need. It's not all good. And so we need to do our bit. One of America's most respected environmentalists, Bill McKibben, says global warming is quite simply the biggest thing that humans have ever managed to do. Very sarcastic. Since the industrial era, the level of CO2 emissions in the atmosphere have been on a vertical climb. I'm sure fossil fuel era will come to an end, but we'll have to move it into the sustainability energy era. This is inevitable. At some point, there will be an understanding. And when with that understanding, there is no choice, but only the ability to act. How do we bring about understanding? Just by asking the right questions. I presented the next two slides at a national conference at the beginning of this week in Philadelphia. I was with Dr. Smith. I'm not too sure if the audience fully understood these slides. This slide shows the CO2 emissions per capita per person. As you can see, all the Middle Eastern oil-producing countries are at the top 4 positions, with Kazakhstan 5th, Australia 6th, and USA 7th. And so it's to do with also human behavior. So what we do, what we eat, and how we move ourselves, transport, is individual. And sometimes all the blame goes on to countries, but we have to look at individuals as well. So it's how we behave as well. So per capita, I feel is very important. The other one is we've actually historically, who has historically contributed most global CO2 emissions? And we can see from this chart, the USA, through the industrialization, 25% of the historical emissions. Europe, with its 28 countries, 22%, China 12.7%, Russia 6%, India at 3%. Cumulatively, one of the biggest contributions to climate change is obviously the United States. And so we're going to have to lead the way. It's the right thing to do. And how do we ask India and African countries to wean themselves off fossil fuel and only use renewable energies without helping them with this transition? The rich countries did agree at COP21 in Paris that they'll provide $100 billion a year to developing countries. That promise never happened. It was much, much lower. It was more like 10 billion. Similarly, people are at a loss when you try to explain them that you have merely exported emissions to China, because when we always hit China with their emissions, it's because we buy their product. It's like scope 2, electricity. We use electricity here in the United States, here in the state of California, without any coal-fired power stations, but we're importing it from other states which use coal-fired power stations. So the same thing is we're exporting a lot of our emissions to China because we buy their goods. If we didn't buy their goods, then they wouldn't emit as much. So I think we have to be very careful on how we assign blame. It's always a blame game, but let's get away from it. Let's do our individual things. So our human behavior as an individual has a greater impact if everyone follows what we do. California, our state, has always led the way with tackling climate change, and we continue to do so. You can see great stuff from California legislatures. Most of the students with us will be transferring to either UC or the CSU system to continue with their studies. And so please know that we're doing their part, having set our goals for climate neutrality. So they, if you look at the higher education, the UC systems, they've pledged to go carbon neutral by 2025, and the CSU carbon neutrality by 2040. You'll be proud to know LACCD leads the way with the passage of the Clean Energy Sustainability Resolution in 2020. I was brought on board to help with the implementation of the resolution, so I'm excited and have rejoined the program. Dr. Smith.
Thank you, Bharat, and it's a pleasure to be here with you all today. So with this slide, this is the culinary garden. This is the culinary building at LA Trade Tech. This is our herb garden. So this building opened in 2021, and it's quickly become very popular. The one thing I like about the building is it gives us an opportunity to take old industry concepts and transform them into new ecological and sustainable practices. Starting with food cultivation. So these 16 planter boxes were planted with various types of tomatoes, green peppers, herbs, and fruits. And so ultimately, we have a student-run restaurant where we are looking to not only provide fresh food, but we're also looking at estimating about 15,000 vegetables and fruit scraps will be converted into compost and completing the food cycle. So in addition to what we're doing just at Trade Tech, I want to also point out our pathway to sustainability. What we've done over the last 20 years on the surfaces should be celebrated. But at the same time, I don't think that we've challenged ourselves enough with our build program. I'm happy to say that, we did have a passing of green building standards in 2009. We did set sustainability. We had green papers in 2009, 2001. We did, initiate our first standards. We do have, through this series, and this timeline, you'll see that in 2010, we had a LEED platinum building, great, celebrated. 2013, we had our first building that approaches net zero at the LA Harbor College Science Complex. And then moving on to ultimately last year is the passing of our sustainability and clean energy resolution, where we have 35 indices that I think that we need to shoot for and that we can get to. Although our goals are ambitious, I believe that they're achievable. And it's important for us to have these types of meetings to get there. Looking at Harbor College, for us, Harbor College, we believe, is leading the way, and for multiple reasons. Not only do we have LEED Platinum Science Complex, that's great, but if we don't maintain the building to be effective and efficient, then we're not doing our part. We also need to ensure that we can create an example of what is possible. So what we're looking at Harbor College is we've actually started a microgrid study. And this study basically would be the blueprint for us to see how we best utilize all of our investments and then take the clean energy generated and energy efficiency systems and see what we can mimic across the district. So, this is just a start for us. I think that the microgrid study will be very telling of what we do. We also have, a reduction of heat island project at Harbor College as well, which Dr. Leddy referred to earlier in his presentation. On-site PV generation. So the photovoltaics have been generating power for many, many years, and that was a commitment that we made as a district. For 15% of new buildings, electricity would be supplied on site. That was an early commitment on the district. I think we hit a lull, and although we were first, there were some technology advancements that we didn't have an opportunity to take advantage of. We are not as aggressive today. However, we are going to be more aggressive than we've been in the last decade. One of the things that's important for us is not only to look at those opportunities where we have the best opportunity to create more renewable energies. Well, what does that look like for us long term? Where are we going to implement new renewable energy projects? And then looking at our partnerships with our local public utility agencies. 6 of our colleges have LADWP, power provided from LADWP, and then we have 3 college campuses that are supported and fed through SCE. With our resolution, I think that, just getting it past the board was an achievement. That was tough. A 4-page resolution with the if then whereas is not easy to get through the chancellor's office and the board, but we had unanimous support. We had, we actually came back with a second reading with some review and revisions and assessment. But what's really pointed here is that I want to point out is our goal for renewable carbon-free electricity by 2030. We're really forcing that issue with our utility service providers, and it'd be 100% carbon-free by 2040. These targets, are achievable, they are doable, but we're also looking at how we do this. It's not enough just to throw capital dollars at something. Both Dr. Leddy and Bharat Patel mentioned that behavior is critical to what we do and how we move forward. We need to plan, we need to assess, we need to ensure that we have all constituents at the table. And then most of all, I think that there's learning, activity, and opportunity as we go. And I think that that's what's important, is to inform and educate along the way. We also have a plan for electric vehicle chargers. Upon my arrival here late in 2019, we only had 2 or 3 locations that had a robust enough EV charging system for all to use. And so what we did was, through the great work of my team out of the district office, we were able to negotiate an opportunity for grants where we have several EV chargers will be, charging stations will be installed across the district. On average, that's between 30 and 40 of those systems per campus. Instead of adding 2 to 5 here or 10, we actually have negotiated a way for us to make this investment. We build the infrastructure, and the Department of Water and Power basically provide us with the rest. So we will have EV charging stations. The goal is across the district. And with that, this is going to be my last slide, but this is what I want to talk about, is basically transforming our way through this process, and based on energy performance and design standards. Spoke a little bit about what we did in the early 2000s, but one thing that we're doing now is, of course, we're trying to decarbonize the campus built environment. I've instructed my design teams to get there by not adding cost. I'm challenging them not to increase the budget, but to leverage the existing technologies that we have to see how we get there. So often it's easy for us to throw money at it, but let's not throw money at it. Let's challenge our design teams, our engineers, and our architects to do something different. One of the things that's important for us is to also capitalize on the technology of yesteryear. And so what do I mean by that? It's important for us to develop master plans, not just facility master plans, but sustainability master plans, as well as integrated energy master plans, so we can take advantage of thermal mass cooling. We can also take advantage of building orientation. We can also look at introducing more outside air, and then where those campuses that are in closer proximity to the ocean, we need operable windows and light equity. Those are things that we've gotten away from, and we've made it very easy on our design teams to say, hey, this is the site, build here. But you know what? I think there's a few things that we've left out. And so now we're trying to change those things in our design standards, in our specifications, to deliver us those things that we're for the best building possible, efficient energy use, as well as ensuring that the long-term usage over the next 30 to 50 years, we have an opportunity to improve on our utilization and make the and ensure that the massing works for us. So those are things that we're doing. We're working towards that. We're also working directly with city and county on several projects. And so as you see projects coming out in the next several months and the next year or two, you will see the benefit of that, of the support and approval of the resolution moving forward. And then we hope that these design standards and specifications aren't dormant. I do believe that standards and specs are living, breathing documents. They should change and periodically be reviewed from time to time based on what we want to have as a collaborative approach with all constituents, the development of our sustainability master plans at each campus. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Today's presentation will be discussing two case studies, the Manhattan Beach Library and the California Air Resources Headquarters Building in Riverside. This was a presentation I performed at the World Congress Tectonics Facade Conference, and the following year I presented it in Bern, Switzerland. So let me ask you just a simple question. If you're asked to design a well-insulated high-performance building, how would you do it? I mean, one of the first thoughts that comes into anyone's mind is to minimize the amount of glazing and to maximize the wall area and install thick mineral wool insulation on the walls. Even if you look at today's Energy Code, Title 24, the prescriptive Energy Code restricts the window area to 40% of the wall area. So having a transparent building goes against everything that one is taught. Indeed, one can achieve a zero net energy building that is totally transparent. And this is a building I would help to design. This was a conference in Bern, Switzerland. The session was well attended by professionals around the world, architects, engineers, and researchers from universities. It was a design build competition. Design architect was Johnson Favreau, and you've got Johnson Favreau's buildings at Trade Tech on the south side. The big white buildings are really good. The existing public library was a single-story building. The brief was to design a two-story building on the condition that the homeowners, who were mainly lawyers, would not have a restricted direct view to the ocean because they lived on the hill right next to the library. And so there should be no equipment on the roof because that's as they look out their window, they won't see that. In addition, the Board of Supervisors passed a resolution to state that all county buildings shall achieve a LEED Gold certification. We won the competition because I came up with a unique idea of an active double skin facade. As you know, LEED, the majority of the points are in the atmosphere and energy category. Now, air itself is a great insulator because the molecules are very far apart. It's not like metal, which are right next to each other, so you can conduct heat, but air is a great insulator. A double facade, a glass vitrine that sits directly on the civic ground, providing openness and transparency. The public walkway flows directly into the building without a threshold, unobstructed views to the sea. With everything exposed, it provides sparks of curiosity and a great learning opportunity. During the day, it's great to see out, and at night, it's great to be seen. There were two solutions. The first was based on natural buoyancy. Or hot air rises, it's buoyant. At the base of the building, you can see a 6-inch high grille at the perimeter base of the building. It would draw cold air and the glass would heat as the sun rises and the heat, and it will also heat the air between the two facades. The chimney effect would allow preheated air to the air handling units and heat other parts of the building that needed heat. Should during the day the air got too hot via sensors, then it would be rejected. We analyzed the air temperature on different facades. We were able to calculate the temperature at the top of the facade for different aspects. We examined the chimney effect for different months of the year. This is a detail of the grille. However, the design architect would not accept the solution. The reason was the grilles provided a distinct separation from the outside and the inside. I suggested to install a grill on the horizontal plane of the slab in front of the first facade and have an airway underneath the first glazing and popping out into the airspace. The architect said, no, this would be like a moat around the building. The second option, a thermal blanket. Let's look at each stage, starting item 1. By code, each person must be provided with fresh outdoor air when it's brought into the building. Then we also have to equal amount of air being exhausted. Otherwise, the air would be heavily pressurized and the doors on the outside of the building would be left open. This air is conditioned at 72 degrees. Item 2, exhaust air is returned to the mechanical room. Item 3, variable speed fans accelerate or decelerate the air flow depending on the temperature reading at each of the facade. 4, provide a thermal blanket, an active double skin facade. To verify this, we need science. We performed a 3D dimensional computational fluid dynamics model. In the x-axis, on the y-axis, and on the z-axis. Total transparent building with a high performance, minimum roof profile, thermal blanket, and seamless threshold equals open access. We examined different glass types, structure of the glass, detailing. You can see a 2-foot space between the 2 panes of glass. This is the air barrier. This is the insulator. More details. Connection details. One can see there is not a threshold. Manhattan Beach is a world center for surfing. The ceilings and millwork is what they used to make the old type of wooden surfboards. The architect used that for the ceilings and the millwork. View out of the second floor. More views. You can see the ocean. Opening day of the public library. You can see the setting of the ocean and the sun setting on the side of the building. If you look on the right-hand side, you can see as the sun goes down, it's as a mirror finish. And on the other side, as you're looking to the building, you can see the transparency. Post-occupancy, how did it perform with the total glass around it? After 3 years of occupancy, we found 29 hours were above 90 degrees and 99 internal temperatures recorded by the thermostat. We found that one of the units, FC6, was a culprit. So, however, the fan coil units 5 and 6 are on the same area and it's open plan. So why was one recording a lower temperature and one a much, much higher temperature? We found that the thermostat was mounted on the wall and received a strong daylight bouncing from the concrete sidewalk. You can see that dotted area that hits the concrete and goes straight up onto the thermostat. And we removed the thermostat, moved it around, and everything was great. You can see the great photo of the library. And this is the next building I'd like to talk about. It's the California Air Resources Board. I don't know if you know, the Volkswagen problem they had. It was the California Air Resources Board actually found the culprit and how they manipulated the smog emissions from the cars. So it was a massive deal. They got a, it was interesting. They were fined tremendously, and CARB got some of that fine to build the building, which you're seeing now. Very interesting. This is the testing facility. So one of the things that we have to understand is what is the function of the actual building, and we are seeing that the function is it's where all the tests, car, trucks, even equipment are tested, and they take the missions. That's one portion of it. There are many other portions of it. This is the diagram, graphic, which shows the building. It's a very large building on approximately 20 acres. And you can see this is the bit where I'm showing you. This is where the cars are parked. This is the administration offices. This is where the vehicles are tested, are very short vehicles, small little vehicles. This is where the heavy duty vehicles are tested. These are the 18-wheelers. And we have small PV. So there's a lot of PVs as a renewable energy system. Can you hear? I don't know if you can hear.
No audio.
Oh, no audio. Okay. Okay, it doesn't matter. You can. This is the chemistry lab. This is the office lab space. Educational conference area. Visitor entry. Auditorium. A lot of PVs. The courtyard, inside, outside space, and the dining area. Very powerful. The lunchroom. This is the observation deck. Open plan. Where the samples are taken from the fume exhausts and looked at. These are the testing areas. It's very large, light duty testing. These are the trucks. Yeah, so I hope you enjoyed that. This is another aerial view of the system, of the building complex. And what I like to say about this complex, it's a zero net energy building. It is a LEED 4.0 platinum building. It's got the petals, another rating system. It's a zero carbon building. It's got everything. It's got everything. This is a photograph I took during construction, so you can see how big it is. And the interesting thing is, these are the dynamometers. So just imagine you've got a 18-wheeler going on this. Underneath it, there are massive motors. So these trucks are going 70, 80 miles an hour above it. These motors are spinning like anything. And the amount of electricity that this plant uses, it uses more power than any other building in a nation per square foot, which is occupied. This is an occupied building. Of course, you have data centers which use a lot of power, but this is an occupied building. There's no other building in the nation that uses more power than this per square foot. And yet, it's a zero net energy building. It's a LEED Platinum 4.0, and it's a zero carbon building. There's no gas in that building at all. So it is, when people say, oh, it's too difficult to do, you just have to bring them over here in Riverside. It'll officially open in November. It's complete. The building is complete. But the official opening, if anyone's interested, I'm more than happy to take them. This just gives you some of the different type of how much power it uses. So this is kilowatt hours, 9 million kilowatt hours. Yeah, 9 million. So we had to figure out how we're going to do this. And when these machines go on, you can see they peak and they come down, they peak. So you have to be able to knock the peaks down. It's not like the sun going around a normal building, like an office building, where it peaks on the west and east side. Here, someone turns a machine on for testing, and they could be for about 2 or 3 hours. They use a lot of power. So you could have an immediate peak, and that peak you're billed for, that, if it's for 15 minutes, you're billed for the entire month. So you have to control those peaks. And this is more analysis of consumption and peak demand. And this is again shifting fuel cells and things like that. But what I'd like to do is spend a few minutes on something which most people may not be aware of, is public art. This is very important to this particular building. I was part of the actual selection and how this was fostered in the building. So I participated, and it was one of the best things I did, I felt, because it was different. So their mission in the public art, let me read this. The public art plan for the California Air Resources Board, Southern California headquarters, seeks to inspire and facilitate the creation of world-class, forward-looking and aesthetically rigorous artworks that focus attention on and spark conversation about air quality and the role of California as a leader in public well-being and environmental sustainability. I thought, now, how can we get a message across to people that they visit the building and spark their interest on sustainability by viewing art? And so we commissioned, this was the plan, we're putting art pieces in the outdoor corridor. That's where people sit and eat, or visitors can eat. The entry breezeway, the front green, entrance foyer, the auditorium, because that's to the public as well. So this has to be accessible to the public, the art. It's not at the back of the building, at the back house. So CARB will host the largest collection of permanent public artworks addressing climate change worldwide. This will be the largest place, a venue to see art which is completely directed to climate change. These some of them, this is a structure they're building at the moment. And as you go through it, there'll be some informational data as it goes through this structure. It's very interesting, and the plants they use. This is Andre Polly on the front green as you go into the building. This Rafik Anadol, I don't know if you've seen this work. There's a lot in San Francisco. This image is pretty large, and it's connected to computers, and they've got stations up on the roof which monitor the CO2, the nitrous oxide, sulfur dioxide, all these different contaminants in the atmosphere. And as the days goes on, it reflects the intensity of the pollution outside to this graphic inside and produces art of intensity. This is Tom Sorrentino. Again, you're looking at when you go in. I don't really want to give it away. It's very interesting as you look at these different types of structures of molecules. And that's the end. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy, at Dr. Smith, more than happy to take them.
Well, thank you, Dr. Smith and Bharat Patel. That was really what we were really looking forward to today, was something more optimistic and actually tangible with realizable goals, and to see that the technology is there, the planning is there, very sophisticated appraisals of what goes on inside a building or what goes on inside the LA Community College District. So today we really have sort of drilled down from the global to the very local, and seeing all of the ways and as a modern industrial urban society take on the challenges of the climate crisis. So the way you can ask a question, we have a good 20 minutes, perhaps more for Q&A. You can either hold down your space bar and that will unmute you, or go to your menus and unmute yourself. and ask anybody any questions you might have as we bringing this to a close today.
Hey, George, I have a question. Chef Jesse from Los Angeles Mission College.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. This is directed to Mr. Smith and the gentleman that just spoke. It's awesome to see Trade Tech, and I was actually there not long ago visiting the garden. You know, something that I work in GHG with someone in the district as far as recycling the water based on the issues that we're facing. And it's something that we really have to look into, particularly when you do large things, infrastructure, and how do you recycle water that comes from sink, and water that comes from showers, and water that comes from that nature. So it could be recyclable. So I worked on a project, took me about 3 years, and I did get some funding. Unfortunately, wasn't able to. And the reason I felt it fell through is because we didn't really have a very good support from our maintenance and operations, due to the fact that it came to be that if at the period of 3 years, recycling water, right, running a pipe from, because our building is actually, if you lack of better words, the water runs uphill. That's how it was built. So we wanted to capture on the great water system, capture a minimum, 60, 100, maybe more, thousands of gallons of water, and purify it by means of natural bacteria. So we could actually water our gardens. So I think it was a little bit lack on who's going to take the burden as far as the money, who's going to pay for it. It ended up being that was going to be after 3 years, it would end up costing the district maybe 20, or the college 26 cents for every so often to run this thing. So I think what we really need is, as you've said, Mr. Smith, more support as far as looking at projects such as this, water reclamation. How do we can reclaim the water and host it in a place where we can actually have natural bacteria and use those waters to actually irrigate our systems? In our case, I did the same thing in Mission College. We built I planted avocados. We are using our gardens to actually use a sustainable methods of teaching our students how to plant their own gardens, have fruits, vegetables, instead of having just shade. There's a lot where we can actually do curve the food desert that exists now more than ever by planting oranges, apples, what have you, instead of having just shade. So I really would love to see that more support and be that the changing agent, as opposed to, well, it's going to be a problem later, who's going to pay for it? There's a lot of money coming from the federals, and especially as we watched the last 3 meetings that I've been in it's nothing but information, George, awesome information. There is often time to digest. I don't know how to digest that or show it to my colleagues or my students. It's a lot of information, but it's critical information. If we want to take time out of our own times and develop and work, we need that support, especially from those managers in maintenance and facilities that, yeah, somebody's got to do this. We have to do it. If I know I'm wasting 100,000 gallons of water every single day, as soon as I walk into that kitchen, and when I live, I want to reclaim most of it. And how do I do that? Right? I need to have that. As you mentioned it, we do the same thing. 600 pounds of vegetables we recycle every day, right? We compost it. We have natural compositions. Anyways, I don't want to take too much, but that's great presentation. Thank you, sir.
Well, let me respond first, and then I'll let Barrett respond as well. First of all, Chef Jesse, thank you for having that level of concern and not letting this go. I think that we've disenfranchised faculty, students, staff based on, at the end of the day, we say it comes at a cost. Well, guess what? Not doing anything also comes at a cost. So it's important for us to develop this sustainability master plan at each campus together. I would love to continue this conversation with you. Hopefully you'll get involved with my sustainability team locally. I think every college has a unique situation, just like the one you described, that we can capture. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to develop a process and a plan, so that now we have goals to shoot for and we can incrementally get there. Without a plan, and it's haphazard, I can't get further funding. So you can help me get there and ask for that further funding, because ultimately we're saving somewhere. So if I can divert the funds of where I'm saving because of the water that I'm expending, we can actually look at a green revolving fund to say, well, if we're going to save money on water here, we're going to implement and institute this structure here, and this is going to have a longer term impact, and the return on investment is XYZ over a couple of 3 years. So if you can, let's connect. I definitely want to work with you. Love the idea. I don't like wasting water either. A big issue for me is central plants. Our blowdown cycles on our central plants, we're actually wasting fresh water every single day at every central plant that we have, not just here. Everywhere. And those are things that we need to refocus, replan the water for usage. So thank you for what you just brought up and shared. And I want to work with you and bring you on.
Thank you. Thank you, George, for all that. Have a great day. Thank you.
I think we have Humberto Gallegos from East LA. He's a chair of engineering there. He's got his hand up. I don't know if Bharat, you wanted to add anything on the water recycling, but there is another question coming from East LA College.
Thank you, George. Hey, first of all, kudos to the BuildLACCD program for hiring our East LA College students for those internships at Jacobs. So appreciate the program. It's working. We're working with AJCC to strengthen that connection with the BuildLACCD. And then I'm not sure if Jesus is still online with us, but just wanted to let him know there is an opportunity for him to seek federal funds through the NSF-ATE program. East LA College was blessed with an ATE grant for about $500,000. And so one way to do some work is to get the external funds and not wait for the administrators to help you out. Just go ahead and seek it and see if you can leverage those funds. So NSF-ATE is another great source. But my question is to our speakers, Dr. Smith. I know Jesus was talking about harnessing the gray water, and I know you showed those neat, at least one of the presentations showed those neat slides where LA and Las Vegas are at, and how they're growing, and how we're all focused on green design, green technologies. My biggest thing is that without water, we're not going to flourish in these cities. And right now there's an alarming situation going on with our water resources. There's not much being stored in these hydraulic structures. And if you go and do a little bit of research on Hoover Dam or any of those structures upstream from that hydraulic structure, these things are being depleted. And so LA gets their water from 3 sources up north, the Colorado and groundwater, but not much is coming out from the, at least not much is being stored along the Colorado River. So my biggest thing, I always vent to my wife, she's also a civil, we both studied to be civil engineers. It's not gonna happen if the water doesn't get stored up in the positive direction inside these structures. And right now it's just going down, it's drawing down too fast. Said I'm almost in awe how much water is being spent in LA County or in San Bernardino County where I reside in, but not much is being relayed to the citizens. Hey, conserve, we're running out. Not much is inside these structures. And so I'm just in awe that we have all these amazing technologies, design schemes, case studies, but none of it's going to happen if those hydraulic structures don't get filled up with water. This is just me venting on the situation because I don't see there's a sense of urgency to either pray for more water or to seek for alternative technologies to get that water into our structures.
If I can just insert a little bit, Humberto, we did the first talk in this series was on California water and the drought. And we did look at plans in Los Angeles to reduce the amount of demand from the Colorado River system and to increase local use, which we saw in one of the video clips, up to 50% of our water would be locally sourced in the next 20 years. So that does involve water recycling. It involves what people unpolitely call toilet to tap. But the truth is we cannot afford to use our water only once. and we can recycle gray water, but we can also recycle wastewater. So I think there are future sources for water in the region that will perhaps take some of the dependency on the Colorado River system away. Bharat, oh, and David Bolio was raising.
Let me just, this is Bharat. Let me just, I got 2 points. The first point is LACCD, one of their policies is to recharge the water table. So stormwater is not discharged to the sewers or anywhere else. We don't, it all goes within the site boundaries. Sorry, Ruben, did you say something?
100%.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're trying to, we have a plan to reclaim 100%.
Yeah, 100%. And the second thing is, I myself have used black water. The three, you have gray water and black water. And the other, Jesus talked about using bacteria. It's very simple to do, but the demonstration projects are really great for colleges. And that's been a very powerful thing. Thanks.
David Bolio had a hand up.
George, my name's David Bolio. I work with George on the Institute, and thanks to everyone participating. I thought maybe, George, we should just mention that one thing we're trying to do in the Institute is bring together faculty like Umberto and Jesus. Umberto, especially now since you're in engineering, it might be good to point out that we've arranged now to have the architecture professors, and hopefully beginning in October, the engineering professors meet on a regular basis with Dr. Smith and Bharat Patel, because surely these buildings that we love to see in the district can serve themselves as learning tools. And surely there's an awful lot we can do. And Umberto, you already cited some of it in terms of internships and conferences and seminars, the various ways in which we can let our buildings and our building team help educate not just our students, but ourselves. I mean, we could talk really for a very long time just about the implications, Bharat, of that Manhattan Beach Library. I mean, it raises a whole host of questions we can't get into now, but for number one, why isn't everybody doing this? Number two, are we going to do it somewhere else? Number three, is there a downside somewhere? Number four, why doesn't everybody get a view of the ocean? Not just lawyers. I mean, just a single building engenders so many ideas. And obviously with the questions that Jesus and Jesse and Umberto you've raised on water, the water issue is so complex and so myriad in its aspects. Well, we could, we should do this water presentation on a regular basis, just because of the new angles, let alone the students who haven't heard it yet. Anyway, a plug for SCI, but
Yes.
Umberto, we hope to see you on October 1st. We'll be meeting, great. We'll be meeting with as many engineers as we can get. I think Elizabeth Chung is on this call with this program, and she'll be joining us hopefully on October 1st also, and hopefully more of you from engineering with the architecture people. Thank you.
I should put your, since it's worth noting our website, SEILACCD.net. And on that website, you will find, of course, a lot of resources for teaching, but we're also posting the recordings of this series of talks. So they do appear, I think, both on our homepage and then in our resources for teaching by the topic area. So when this recording becomes available, I'll post it on our website. I'll share it with Lourdes Brent, and we'll make sure that people get access to it so they can, refer to it and use it in classroom settings, etc. We're coming up on our last 3 minutes. I want to give a chance for anybody who might want to either announce an upcoming event or ask a short question. We can do that, but it's now 12:57.
Yeah. Let me just say that if anyone wants to visit, the Manhattan Beach Library's been open for at least 6 years. So it's worth physically going down there. I always get a learning opportunity when I actually see the thing, right? Not just PowerPoint presentation. And the other one, the Manhattan Beach, the California Air Resources Board, that just blew me away. I was 7 years on that project. So I know it in a lot of detail from start to finish. So when they open, November, the first 2 or 3 weeks of November, if anyone wants to go and see it. It's worth going. It really is. We'll arrange it for something. I'm sure we will.
Well, thank you, Bharat. This has been of our series so far. This has been, I think, the best one. It's more optimistic. We're seeing tangible goals with tangible ways of getting there. And I'm hoping that will encourage people to become more active participants at our campus level when we set up sustainability committees and when we pursue the goals that facilities has for 2030. That's going to require a lot of cooperation from faculty and staff and administrators as we implement the management of buildings that might be quite sustainable in their design and building, but that require very careful maintenance in order to meet those parameters. So I want to thank everybody, especially Lawrence Brent, who has helped set up this series through Professional Development College, to Dr. Smith and Bharat Patel for attending today's discussion and really providing a very rich amount of detail into what are we going to do about the climate crisis living in a very large metropolitan area such as Los Angeles. So with that, I'm very thankful for all of you today. We had as many as 49 people at one point, and that I think that's quite a success. So we will then see you. Our next talk will actually be in October, middle of October, and the topic there will be biodiversity. The talk after that in November will be on, interestingly, fire. So maybe by then the fire season will be over or we'll be in the thick of it. I have no idea, but November will also perhaps have a guest speaker.